Jane Goodall revolutionized primatology by fostering connections and communicating with chimpanzees, our closest living relative, something that had never been done before.
Through her groundbreaking work, she taught us the beauty and importance of our connection with the natural world, and that humans are more similar to other species than humanity was taught to believe.
In researching and communicating with chimpanzees, she became part of their society.
She has taught us not only about their behaviors, but about ourselves and humanity through her studies.
Valerie Jane Morris Goodall was born on April 3, 1934, in London, England, to Margaret Mavonway Joseph Van and Mortimer Morris Goodall. When she was 1, her father gifted her a toy chimpanzee that she named Jubilee, which was the item that started her growing interest and fascination with chimpanzees. She aspired to go to Africa, and even though it was odd that she had those dreams at such a young age, her mother would tell her, "Jane, if you really want something, and if you work hard, take advantage of the opportunities and never give up. You will somehow find a way." She left school at 18 and worked as a film production assistant and a waitress, still invested in her deep-rooted dreams and aspirations to go to Africa.
She was finally invited to Kenya to stay with a friend, and on April 2, 1957, she arrived. She later met Louis Leakey, who was curator at the National Museum of Natural History, and he hired her as assistant secretary. He had made the discovery that mankind's roots were African, and he was looking for someone to study chimps in the wild to look for evidence of just that. Louis Leakey was particularly interested in a group of chimps near Lake Tanganyika. Louis Leakey states, "The remains of prehistoric man were often found on a lakeshore, and it was possible that an understanding of chimpanzee behavior today might shed light on the behavior of our Stone Age ancestors." She was fascinated with this lake Leakey mentioned and made the decision to travel to Gombe to do further research on chimpanzees.
Just as they were set to depart for Gombe, the district commissioner of the Kigoma region said that they would be interfering with the African fishermen. While she was waiting, she studied for vet monkeys on Lolui Island in Lake Victoria, and it was 3 weeks before she learned she could go back to Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. Even though the chimpanzees and monkeys behaved differently when she interacted with them, she learned several things about how to approach the monkeys, and these things were of use to her during her studies in Gombe.
They returned to Nairobi, and in her book, In the Shadow of Man, Jane states, "First, it was essential to wait and find out how the local Kigoma district Africans would react to the tales of rioting and disorder in the Congo. Eventually, she gained passage into Gombe."
Jane Goodall and her mother, Van, arrived in Gombe on the eastern shore of Lake Tanganyika, north of Kigoma, on July 14, 1960. They traveled with David Anstey, who introduced them to the locals and aided them in their search for the chimpanzees. Surprisingly, when initially arriving in Gombe, Jane Goodall did not feel excitement or trepidation. Rather, she felt detached. After setting up camp in Kasekela, Jane went exploring, and her first major wildlife sighting was a troop of around 60 baboons. After seeing the troop, she no longer felt out of place from Kasekela. She said, "A sense of calm came over me. More and more often I found myself thinking, this is where I belong. This is what I came into this world to do."
Her first full day, she was disappointed that she was not allowed to go alone. A rumor was spread that she was a government spy, so she had a guide to come with her to guarantee that she and the villagers were safe, as well as to ensure that her observations were truthful. She traveled with the chief of Mongongo's son, the game scout, and Rashidi, her porter.
A leader of the group recognized an area they came across as a chimpanzee sighting spot. They heard the chimpanzees communicating to each other by banging on stumps and making loud noises, and the chimps eventually settled in a tree. On the first day, she saw 16 chimpanzees, and they were very cautious of the group. For the majority of 3 days, the chimpanzees stayed in a tree, and it was difficult for Goodall to learn very much about them.
Even though she saw a good amount of chimpanzees, she didn't see a lot of interaction and was dispirited. After 8 weeks, she didn't really learn anything, but she enjoyed observing other animals, such as the red colobus monkey.
3 months after arriving in Gombe, Van and Jane fell ill of malaria. 2 weeks later, Jane was eager to get back to her explorations, but she was especially anxious about the lack of discoveries she had made. When she did finally go out alone, she discovered a peak, which was an important vantage point for her discoveries. While on that very peak, she observed a group of 3 chimpanzees and found that her theory was correct. They were less afraid of just one person. 2 other groups eventually arrived, and every day, Jane Goodall would go to the same spot and watch the chimpanzees eat figs. Eventually, they became used to her and only her presence. This happened for about a month, and she started to get a sense of what chimpanzee life was like, and the chimpanzees, accustomed to her presence, became less frightened as time went by. Ultimately, she started to recognize the individuals of the group and began naming them.
In 1960, she made the observation of a group of chimpanzees eating a bush pig. Prior to this discovery, scientists had assumed that they were mainly herbivores. Later, Jane witnessed the actual hunting process for the chimpanzees, when they slaughtered a red colobus monkey and ate almost every bit, which showcases their resourcefulness. This scene is disturbing because these two species are very closely related, and for them to kill and then eat one of their relatives highlights a main difference between man and animal. Now that humans know that on the evolutionary trail, chimpanzees and man cross paths, humans don't slaughter and eat them. Humans have a sense of right or wrong, which filters their actions, while chimpanzees act on survival, which might be due to our differing brains.
After her meat-eating discovery, she noticed one of the chimpanzees, David Greybeard, fishing for insects using a stick, which intensified her curiosity. It was an observation that added to her already growing hypothesis that chimpanzees are not drastically different from humans. Later, Louis Leakey wrote, "We must now redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as human."
An array of human behaviors, such as hugging and kissing, are inherited by chimpanzees. Chimpanzees also reach maturity in stages, develop profound parental bonds, inherit intelligence biologically, and use political trickery to fulfill their ambitions. These traits, once believed to be unique to Homo sapiens, highlight the evolutionary journey that our common ancestor shared with chimpanzees 6 million years ago.
The differences between humans and chimpanzees are few and far between. Chimpanzees utilize communication and sound, but they cannot discuss or teach. However, chimps have many unforeseen talents, such as the creation of tools, the ability to deal with ideas instead of events, and generalization.
On March 4, 1967, in Nairobi, Hugo Eric Louis van Loeck, Grub, was born to Jane Goodall, then Jane Goodall Loeck, and Hugo van Loeck, Jane's first husband. Jane Goodall was very fond of the way a few of the female chimpanzees raised their young, and she even used many of their tactics to raise her own child.
In 1974, Jane Goodall started noticing a split between Gombe's chimpanzees. Eventually, two groups were created, a new, relatively small troop set up in the south, and a northern group consisting of the original Gombe chimpanzees. Once the northern chimpanzees realized their superior power and population, they attacked. The attacks were gang-like. The males pounded the victims and then left them for dead. Jane stated, "They did things to their fellow chimps that they would never do in a community, but which they would do when they are trying to kill a prey animal. The war was a disaster," says Goodall.
This war was eye-opening. It represented just how similar the chimpanzees are to humankind, how they thrive off of the fear of others. It revealed their dark side, a side that kills members of the same species and shatters a civilization, just to quench a thirst for power and succession. In a way, the war disappointed Jane. She said, "It was awful, not just for the chimps, but for me. I thought they were like us, but nicer. It was a real shock to see what they did to each other. That is why it was so dreadful." She had been hopeful for the behavior of the chimpanzees by thinking that they were more peaceful and good-natured than humans. But, as a result of the war, she was proven incorrect. In many instances, Jane had been very optimistic about the chimpanzees and their behavior toward their own kind. But their aggression and hatred overpowered their common collectivism, which represents another instance in which the chimpanzees are similar to humans.
Succeeding her studies, many chimpanzee observation projects have been created, which illustrates her impact on the world of conservation. If humans were to know that we do not want an animal extinct, then so many more species could be saved. At the moment, Jane Goodall is working as a conservationist and has led others on this path. She has specifically led more females on the study of primatology. She paved the way as a woman during the 1950s to 60s, when women were scarce in science. She was a true pioneer and had to overcome many obstacles to be represented during the time of her study. She also changed the way that scientists study many different species with her unconventional approaches of studying animals. Through communication with the chimpanzees and our developed evolutionary connection with them, the want to protect them is magnified. Stephen Jay Gould states, "We can never know by studying ourselves alone whether important aspects of our mental capacities reflect an ancestral evolutionary heritage, or new features evolved or socially acquired by our lineage. Chimpanzees are the best natural experiment we will ever have for exploring this central question. The involvement and connection to chimpanzees that humans have and their evolutionary past is profoundly important."
She witnessed communication between individuals in the chimpanzee group, similar to how humans do, but with one crucial difference. They do not have a written or spoken language. Their most used form of communication is body language, which is another way that humans communicate with each other. Her research was groundbreaking and revolutionized science and the lens through which humans view themselves.